You're listening to The Abundance Agenda, a podcast about growth and progress. I'm James O'Malley.
And I'm Martin Robbins.
This week, a heartwarming Christmas tale about something actually getting built, or I guess unbuilt. But first, why the National Grid is having connection issues. So, Martin, I'm going to start this week by telling you about a terrible habit that I've developed.
Is it writing hot takes about current events for your Substack, James? Because, at least that's fairly productive. It keeps you out of mischief.
I wish it was. Churning out thousands of words every week, actually surprisingly hard work and very unsympathetic to complain about to people with real jobs. But anyway, Martin, the problem I have is I like going to gigs, right? I'm a badass punk rocker at heart. I love nothing more than waving my fist in the air, sticking it to the man. And so all the time, I'll buy tickets to see bands that are passing through town and think, yeah, I'm going to go to the gig and yeah, rock out, or whatever the phrase would be.
Whatever the young people do.
Exactly. But here's the thing, Martin. I'm also 38 now, and what I've found happens more often than not is I'll buy the tickets because I think, I really want to go to the gig and I want to secure my place at the gig. But then on the day, it'll get to about 4 or 5 o'clock, and I'll be thinking, do I really want to leave the house? Can I really face standing up for 3 hours in like a horrible, dank venue with toilets, which are sort of a biohazard zone with just, and standing up for that long at my age. So I'll just look at the tickets and be like, I can't be bothered. And I just won't go.
Yeah, I'm somewhat older than 38, and my idea of a good gig involves like a lounge bar, some nice chairs, perhaps an armchair with some plush cushions, a glass of wine, table service, ideally, and just a bit of mellow jazz at a reasonable volume, not too loud, you don't want it to be deafening. I think basically my philosophy for life, James, is that if something is worth doing, it's worth doing sitting down with a drink. So I do kind of understand your vibe, but I guess my question would be, if you're going to support all these crazy anti-capitalist punk bands, you could just not do the commercial part. You could just not buy the ticket in the first place. It's got to be a bit annoying to have sold a bunch of tickets and then nobody turns up.
You're just a tool of the establishment, Martin. You're sucking at the teat of the status quo. But no, I'll be honest, I sort of agree. It's a bit of a dick move. I think one of the worst ones I did was I actually went to the gig, but I deliberately looked up the stage times ahead of time and timed it so I arrived just before the main band and left right at the end. So it was incredibly efficient. But at the same time, that's not really the done thing. You're supposed to go and support the up-and-coming bands in the support bands. But anyway, so I get it. I'm a monster. But, the reason I buy these tickets, Martin, and we will get to a story relevant to the Abundance Agenda eventually, I promise. And the reason I buy the tickets is because I want to give myself the option of going to the gig in the future. And obviously, with a gig, it might sell out. So I need to secure my spot.
So basically, you've got FOMO, but also part of you wants to miss out, which I feel like is a very interesting discussion that you could have with your therapist, James. Why are we talking about it here?
So I mentioned this because something very similar to this has been actually going on with the National Grid.
So essentially, you're paying for your electricity because you would like to have the option of using it, but most of the time you're sitting in the dark. Is that it?
Weirdly, very similar to that, Martin. So something I think is really interesting about the National Grid is how it all just basically works all of the time, and we don't really think about it unless something goes wrong. We turn on a plug at home and the electricity comes out, and you never think about all the work that goes into making that happen. It requires loads of management and stuff. There's a control room somewhere with people in it watching a bunch of dials and graphs and tweaking things and making sure that supply is balanced with demand. And there's people out there maintaining the network, making sure the electricity continues flowing. And it's just something we take for granted.
Yeah, I remember in the olden days when there were newspapers and linear television that you had to have like a little aerial on the top of your set to receive. And then it always used to be a big story, like, 20 million people would watch Coronation Street on ITV every evening. I don't know what any of those things are, but there'd be like an ad break in the middle of it. And everyone would just go and turn on the kettle at the same time. And it would be like this enormous spike in electricity usage across the UK.
And it's weirdly actually very similar when we build new stuff as well. So if you build like a small housing development, it's not that much of a problem. You can probably plug in to the electricity grid with relative ease. But then if you've got like a larger development, like a larger housing estate that's being built, or a new industrial thing, like a factory, not that we have many factories left in this country, or maybe something like a data center the big hot button issue of the time, suddenly you've got this thing that exists in the world which needs an absolute ton of electricity to function, and then you have to find some electricity to plug into it. And the interesting thing is, so I don't think generating electricity to run something like a data center is that much of a problem. Well, okay, it is a problem. We talk about it endlessly on this show. If you want to know why generating energy in this country is a problem, just listen to basically any episode from the past. Go back and have a look on abundancepod.com. But it's also a geographical problem and a logistical problem. It's about transmission. It's about how to get electricity to specific locations. And this basically is why the National Energy System Operator, NESO, has a queuing system for exactly this purpose.
Oh, excellent stuff. I mean, this is pretty stirring. This is what Great Britain is known for, I guess, or the cradle of modern civilization. And part of that is a damn good queuing system, which I assume is working perfectly well.
Oh, well, let's find out, Martin. So until now, this queuing system for plugging new stuff into the grid has been simply first come, first serve, which sounds simple, but it's turned into a huge problem. As it turns out that property developers, people building stuff, are a lot like me when I buy tickets. They'll get their place in the queue, they'll buy their virtual ticket to join the queue, but then they do that, even if they're not really 100% sure if they're going to need it, because it's important to get in place just in case later on they decide they want to. And this reality, as it turns out, has massive consequences for building stuff in this country. So according to Ofgem, the energy regulator, the queue sort of backlog was up to 730 gigawatts of capacity as of November last year. And apparently now it's as high as 738 gigawatts. And the crazy thing is, I can't believe this statistic is real, but this is apparently what people are being told, is that if you apply to connect your new factory, warehouse, data center, big housing estate or whatever to the grid, you could be told the waiting time is up to 10 to 15 years because of this first come, first serve system.
I mean that sounds pretty bad. I will say that's not the fault of the queuing system. That feels like people don't know how to queue properly. Did we let some French people into the development system for some reason, James?
Sorry, this is completely tangential. When we went to the Forbidden City in China, my partner Liz was queuing up to buy a ticket at the ticket office. She was literally second in line, and yet still someone there tried to cut in the queue in front of her. So queuing etiquette and queuing culture is a genuinely uniquely British thing, I think, based on our experience.
I would love to see the consequences of someone trying to cut in front of the line in front of your partner. But carry on.
I'll put it this way, she wasn't happy. But anyway, queuing woes aren't just bad for us at tourist attractions, it's also bad when you're trying to build stuff. So a really good example of this sort of national grid queuing problem is Ellesmere Port, the massive car factory that's near Liverpool, makes cars for Stellantis, who used to be Vauxhall or are Vauxhall or something. I'm not a car person. Anyway, according to The Guardian, about a year ago, they put 4 megawatts of solar panels on the roof of this car factory, and it would generate enough energy to power, they always use the equivalent of 8,000 homes, or I guess one factory, I presume. But anyway, they did this and you think, brilliant, that's a great way of generating the energy they need and doing it slightly more greenly, even though they're building cars. But then they were told they can't connect it to the grid until 2035.
So that's sort of like if you turned up to the gig and you weren't allowed in, but you're like the lead singer of the band that's performing or something. That's kind of insane.
Yeah, it's mad. And the same Guardian article, which I'm cribbing from here, it also mentions a company called Segro, who I'm not familiar with, but apparently they're a FTSE 100 logistics supplier. I mean, maybe I should do some investigation. I'm intrigued. But they wanted to build a warehouse in the West Midlands, and they were told they had to wait till 2038. So this is a really sort of meaty perennial problem now, which is affecting all sorts of large-scale developments.
Yeah, I mean, that's insane. It can't take 13 years to be allowed to build a warehouse. That's just completely dysfunctional, right? So effectively at that point, you're saying, we're clueless and we've wet the bed. Like, we do not know how to progress this in any way.
Yeah, it's sort of mad. And later on this week's show, we're going to actually be speaking to James Small-Edwards, who's a member of the London Assembly. He's just published a sort of jaw-dropping report that basically reveals that this future grid demand and how the queue works has locked up so much demand. It's actually affecting housing in London now, the most important place. So he's got housing developments in his constituency in West London that, again, weren't expecting to get grid connections until 2037. And that's partially because of competing demands, which we'll get to in the interview, to do with data centres. But also, it's just to do with, this queuing system, stuff like that. And it's just frustrating because you hear about all the spaces in the queue being taken up and you just think, how many of these projects might not even happen? The people are buying their tickets and, oh God, it's really irritating. I can see it from other people's perspective now. It must be maddening.
I mean, it is terribly un-British behaviour. I think that's all I can say about this. To my mind, it's not the queuing system that's wrong. It's every single person using the queuing system. But stepping back a little bit, so obviously, as you say, more energy always useful. But we've seen when we talked about micronuclear reactors a few months ago, it's also about physically getting energy to the right places, I assume.
Yeah, well, this is the problem, Martin. So it's not just a demand side thing. It's not just people wanting to build warehouses. Like with the Vauxhall example, it's a supply problem too. If you have a solar project or a new solar farm or something, you can't even connect that up quickly to the grid because the limiting constraint is the grid itself. The physical cables, the substations, or the infrastructure to actually move the electricity around. So I guess we also have like a ton of renewable electricity we could be using just sitting unused because it can't get a grid connection.
Yeah, and we talked about this previously in the context of the sort of big offshore wind projects. So there was an amazing example in Germany, which I can't remember the name of and probably couldn't pronounce if I did. But essentially, they built gigawatts of wind capacity off the coast of Germany and the North Sea. And then it just sat idle for over a year because they physically couldn't get the power to the mainland and distribute it through the grid. So anyway, hopefully, James, you're going to tell me that someone's figured out a way to start unblocking some of this.
Fingers crossed, Martin, and that's why we're talking about it this week. So Ofgem, the energy regulator, they've announced a big change this week in that the queuing system is changing. So rather than it just be first come, first serve, they're changing it to basically two separate queues, what they're calling Gate 1 and Gate 2. So basically for more speculative projects and less speculative projects. So the idea is that you're building your warehouse or something. To qualify as a Gate 2 project, which gets you on the grid faster, you're going to, rather than just have to have your ticket, your virtual ticket, you're going to have to basically prove your development is actually going to happen. There's going to be a bunch of tests involving sort of providing paperwork. So, for example, you're going to have to show you've got the secured land rights for like a minimum of 20 years or something like that, or you've got planning permission to actually build the thing. This is the mad thing. People apparently get these spaces in the queue before they've even got like planning permission and stuff. And then also, if you can sort of demonstrate that your project will also align with the 2030 net zero grid plan, which Ed Miliband has been pursuing, that will also get you bumped up the queue. So I imagine under this new system, if you have got planning permission for, a solar farm or something like that, then you're going to shoot up the queue more quickly because that just seems obvious. If you can prove this thing's actually going to get built, if you can point at it and go, look, this is being built, maybe that will speed things up.
Yeah, it's kind of wild that people are basically applying for a connection to the grid and getting put in the queue before they even own the land or have planning permission. I don't know if that's something that's become more of a problem in recent years, if it's like those people speculatively buying up driving tests that have caused massive delays there as well. But it seems like a similar phenomenon. It just seems like a bit of a crazy situation that they've allowed to develop.
Yeah, I don't know the entire backstory as to how much of a new problem it is, but it's certainly a bigger problem. But apparently the reason that this sort of system has emerged is because often it's done to de-risk an investment. Because I suppose if you're an investor and someone wants to build a wind farm, you're thinking, well, shall I put my money into this? If they can demonstrate and go, look, here's our place in the queue, we will have this thing connected in, a certain point in time, that will give you more confidence to invest. So I guess there's something there, but I guess the hope is that by changing the system to people who can already prove their credentials, will just speed up the queue in general. So this will become something people worry about less.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a pretty obvious change, right? Essentially, the serious people get a proper allocated slot in the queue, and the less serious people, speculative developers, the French, are kind of further back and penciled in, and they have to go through more hoops to actually firm up the place. Otherwise, it just gets given to another developer or gig attendee. Perhaps we'll find this coming to a ska venue near you, James. But why hasn't this been done until now?
So, to be honest, Martin, I'm not really sure why it's not happened yet. I guess it's one of those things that's been sort of grandfathered in, or it's a system that's evolved over time. But I guess this new system, there are going to be some trade-offs here. So like I say, the financing thing, will it make it harder to prove to investors that something is viable if they can't just get a ticket in the queue for a certain fixed period of time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of skeptical. I think the thing about property investors that you have to remember is ultimately they do have to invest, but there's always going to be a race to the bottom in terms of risk. So, of course, if you give them an option to claim a spot in the queue for free, they're going to do that because it costs them nothing and it transfers a tiny bit of risk to the grid. But I'd be amazed if it was actually a deal breaker, right?
Yeah, and there's also a sort of, I guess, a theoretical legal risk with this new system in that when you've got a queue that's just first come first serve, it's pretty easily defensible. People complain, you just go, well, you join the queue when you join the queue. Whereas if you've got a system where the regulator or whoever is making sort of judgment calls on which projects are most viable, then it does invite more sort of political or legal challenges, as obviously developers with millions of pounds on the line have a strong incentive to kick off if their project isn't deemed quite as credible enough to get up the queue. But yeah, I guess I hope this new change can fix things, if it can speed up the deployment of the grid connections, because it just seems crazy. If we want stuff to be built in this country, then telling people doing these big sort of investments, which are going to be the thing that moves the needle in terms of economic growth and stuff, if you're saying you've got to wait until the mid-2030s, then no wonder we're in the mess we're in. So yeah, I hope this will change things.
And speaking of being first in the queue, James, so what would we recommend that people do if they want to be first in the queue to receive this podcast every week and listen to it without having to barge their way through a bunch of other oiks that got in there first?
Yeah, if people want to barge through and get this podcast as soon as it drops every week, make sure you're subscribed in your podcast app of choice. Subscribe to us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. We're even on now because Gen Z want video. It's horrifying, but that's how the world is. So make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts.
So James, what are you up to this Christmas?
I think I'm doing the usual thing. I'm going up to my parents' house and we're just going to sort of sit on the sofa and look at our phones in silence while, Strictly or Wallace and Gromit's on the telly or something like that.
That sounds fantastic. We've got a large amount of family turning up. Some would say too much family turning up, but we'll see.
You'd never say that, Martin, would you? About your family?
No. Other people, some unnamed, unspecified other people, but I'll probably mostly be asleep in the corner, full of brandy, which is a wonderful cocktail of port and brandy, effectively fortified wine, and just trying to tune out all the noise and children and all the other kind of annoying stuff that comes with Christmas.
That sounds nice. It sounds like you're getting into more of the spirit than I will be. The thing I'm really looking forward to, and I don't know how pathetic this is to announce on a podcast, but we're planning to drive home at like 4 or 5 o'clock on Christmas Day. We're not even going to wait for the day to end because I'm thinking the roads are going to be deserted. It's going to be brilliant. We're going to get door to door in like maybe 90 minutes or something. So I'm very excited about that. But yeah.
I mean, we've all dreamed of the 90-minute Christmas exit, James. I think that's really, really peak Christmas right there. But have you ever wondered if there's a better way to spend Christmas?
Well, last year I went to New Zealand for Christmas. That was nice because the weather was tolerable and my family wasn't there. So,
well, what if I told you there was an even more incredible destination that you could go to this Christmas? And if you're wearing an orange jacket and the correct safety equipment and you happen to work for the right company, you could take part in the ultimate festive activity, which is demolishing a bridge.
I'm not going to lie, Martin, that sounds genuinely like something I'm into.
Yeah, I mean, I would be right in for that. And it even has an appropriate name, this bridge. It's called the Winterstoke Bridge, and it's in the multi-hyphenated town of Weston-super-Mare in Somerset, which, out of curiosity, I was looking up why it's called Weston-super-Mare, and apparently it's Western because that's like, it's a town in the West, and the super-mare was a Victorian affectation to try and make it sound like a posh seaside destination.
Now it just makes it sound trashy.
It is a little bit like once you know it, it's like it's a bit try hard. I think it's a bit like, drop, just call it Western. But anyway, leaving aside my opinions on Somerset towns, to tell you this Christmas story, this Christmas carol, James, we're going to have to visit the past, the present, and the future.
Hang on, Martin, does that make me the Scrooge in this segment?
To be honest, I think of you more as Bob Cratchit, the underpaid clerk, frantically working on a Sunday night trying to get the edit done on the podcast while other people kind of hammer you and don't pay you enough. But I'm not sure if that's better for your self-esteem. Personally, I think I'd rather be the Scrooge in the story. Big swimming pool full of money. That seems more fun. Dive in it every day. Was that Dickens or DuckTales? Can't remember.
I know what you mean, Martin, but I guess at least I will be the more emotionally relatable one, the hero of the story. Or is that how it works? I've only seen the Muppet version, and Kermit's Bob Cratchit, isn't he?
Yeah, I think in any sort of adaptation, you want to be whichever character Kermit the Frog would play. I think that's generally how you know if you're the moral center of pretty much any situation. Like, I don't know, let's say you're in a workplace drama, you should probably think, would Kermit the Frog play me in this situation? Or would I be one of like the Waldorf or the Cookie Monster? That's probably like I'm on the wrong side of things. But anyway. So let's go back in time, James.
Mm.
Ooh, and now we're in the ghost of the Christmas past. Yeah, we're already getting into the festive spirit now.
When did this become Amdram? I feel like I'm on a Radio 4 play, which are all universally terrible. Like, yeah.
Well, we can't afford sound effects, apparently. That's what you told me anyway, so I'm just going to have to go for it. So let me set the scene. It's the year 1941.
Oh, God.
Britain is at war. France has fallen. Nazi bombs are raining down on London. And Europe has fallen into the hands of the enemy. And our great island nation stands alone, but we shall outlive the menace of tyranny. We will ride out the storm of war, James.
Martin,
we will.
It's not Christmas unless Winston Churchill plays a visit to the podcast, is it?
Sorry, James, the spirit of Churchill compelled me. But anyway, as I'm sure other more serious history podcasts would say, it's a shit part of the war for England fans. We're at war with Japan now as well, so that's not going great. America is still twiddling its thumbs, and Britain is like this kind of puzzle box that Hitler can't unlock. We've rescued the army from his panzers at Dunkirk. We've defeated the Luftwaffe in the air in the Battle of Britain, and this has all morphed into the Blitz, which is kind of ongoing, and if anything, has increased public support for the war in Britain.
Oh, that's surprising, Martin, because I would have thought, I don't personally like getting blown up, but it became more popular?
Well, no, but I mean, think about it this way, James. Let me try and put this in terms that you would understand. If someone blew up your local Apple store or, let's say the local broadband fiber cabinet, you would be out on your electric scooter looking for blood, James. I think that's pretty certain. And that's effectively where the state that we were in 1941. But anyway, so the name of the game here right now is aircraft production. One day, and I've threatened this for some time now, but I really want to do like a Battle of Britain special because it's an incredible story of logistics and industrial capacity. But essentially, Britain is producing thousands of aircraft every year. During the Battle of Britain, you could be flying your aircraft, shoot down some Nazis, get shot down yourself over Suffolk or somewhere, and by the time you get back to your airfield, there's a brand new aircraft waiting for you. It's a very exciting time, and one of the hearts of aircraft production is the area around Bristol, and in particular the Bristol Aircraft Company.
I've actually heard of this, Martin. I've been to, I think it's Aerospace Bristol. We've actually talked about it on this show before, where there's a whole museum where you can see these sort of like tiny Bristol-made aircraft as well as a Concorde.
Yeah, it's incredible sort of area in this time. You have the Blenheim bombers and the Beauforts and so on. So in this part of the war, basically half the British economy is like an aircraft maximizer, like the old paperclip scenario in AI. And essentially anything that slows down production has to be dealt with or stopped or blown up or whatever. And one of the problems, it turns out, for the Bristol Aircraft Company is actually getting people to the site. So the factory where they assemble the Blenheims and the Beaufighters is just outside Weston-super-Mare, but there's a railway line in between. So, the solution obviously is let's just build a bridge. And this is wartime, so basically someone pours a big slab of concrete, no fuss, bit of elbow grease, and slam it over the railway. And it was only ever meant to be temporary, but it's still in place 84 years later.
So this sounds to me, Martin, like another sort of amazing but ultimately depressing example of how we used to be able to get things done in the past, because if this was done today, we'd surely be talking about how the bridge could never be built because of planning permission or something like that.
Well, I mean, kind of, but actually it turns out not in practice. So it turns out that there is such a thing as building too quickly because, they put this in place in a matter of weeks or months, but almost immediately big cracks started appearing in the concrete and they had to close it again. And in fact, it took them almost 2 years to properly repair it and get the bridge open in 1943. And even then, it had a 5-mile-an-hour speed limit. It wasn't until after the war that they were able to actually bring it up to spec and open it to public transport. And then eventually it became like a main trunk road connecting different parts of Weston-super-Mare.
Okay, but even so, Martin, at least this bridge actually has a road connecting it up, unlike the bridge to nowhere on HS2 that you talked about on the show a few weeks ago. And in 2 years as well. That's sort of quite impressive by today's standards, isn't it? Again, if it was today, surely we'd be going, well, it's going to take 10 years and cost £1,000 million.
Well, I mean, it would take 2 years to put in
Yeah.
the planning application these days. But so, of course, moving on from the war, of course, aircraft production starts to slow down after the war. And then the bridge becomes important for another abundance related topic, which is housing. Now, this may surprise you, James, but it turns out that in the distant past, Britain used to be short of housing. I know it's almost impossible to imagine today when there are 3 houses for every person, but back in the 40s and 50s, there was a real shortage of places for people to live and a real danger that house prices might become really high. Now, fortunately, that never happened, and that's because the post-war government embarked on a massive house building project. And this bridge meant that they had a perfect site, the other side of it, to build hundreds of prefab aluminium and concrete bungalows in short order, providing homes to thousands of people in Somerset, which, I guess it's in Somerset, but at least it's something. And so this has been in use ever since, which brings us, James, to the present.
Oh, God, does this mean another ghost, Martin?
Oh, I'm the ghost of Christmas present.
What was that, a slightly Chilean ghost? I don't know if you were going with the accent there.
I was almost perilously close to being ethnically problematic, I think, there. But anyway, 80 years have passed. And the bridge puts in a jolly good shift, but it wasn't a fantastic bridge to start with. It wasn't in the greatest of states. And by the 2020s, everyone agrees that it's coming to the end of its life. Weight restrictions are put in place to try and keep it going a bit longer, but its days are numbered and it needs to be replaced. But there are some real challenges around the ownership of it, because originally this was part of the war effort, and it was actually built by the War Office that owned a lot of the infrastructure that was built during the war. And even though now it's basically a bridge in the middle of a large town, technically it's still owned by the Ministry of Defence. So there are all sorts of issues around, funding, like who's responsible for the upkeep of the bridge, and if you replace it, who should be paying for this? Like, it's a real minefield.
So presumably, Martin, this is where the problems start, I guess. You're going to stop talking about World War II and you're going to tell us some sort of classic abundance agenda, meaty story of bureaucratic incompetence, indecision and strife.
Nope, everyone just agreed to replace it, James.
Sorry, Martin, just can I just check what podcast we're performing on and get you to repeat that?
So it's going to cost about £15 million. The MOD and the local council, they came together, they talked to each other like adults, and they worked out an agreement to fund it. The MOD are going to pay for some, the council's going to top up the money, and the work is proceeding pretty much on schedule. And it turns out that the schedule is quite important, and this comes really to why we've included it in this episode, because there is a very narrow window to demolish the bridge. In fact, there's a single day when they're going to take this away and make space for the new one to be built. It's going to happen in one very specific day. Now, can you guess, James, what day that is?
Easter Day? Easter Sunday?
No. Christmas, you fool. It's the one day of the year when it turns out there are no trains running, so they can just, hop onto the line, slip the bridge out. However they do that, I assume there are cranes and big machines or straps or something. I don't know. I'm not a bridge expert, but it'll get done that day, job done, and Boxing Day, the line can just reopen.
Oh my God, Martin, it's a Christmas miracle. This is genuinely impressive. This is a positive, happy story about something actually getting built, or I guess unbuilt and then rebuilt, and it all seems fine.
Yeah, and so this brings me now on to the next chapter, James. Are you ready for this? What comes after the present?
I'm terrified, Martin, but let's go for it.
I'm the ghost of Christmas future.
What is this?
Once again, if we had a sound effect budget, we wouldn't be reduced to this kind of blithering incompetence. So let me take you through the future of this crossing. So, of course, they have to build a new bridge. It's a state-of-the-art bridge that they're going to build. And as with pretty much everything, it seems these days, the bridge has to be built to last for 120 years, which is a pretty high standard, certainly if you compare it to the slab of concrete that was hastily assembled back in the 1940s.
So this is something that applies to HS2 as well, right? So it's caused problems because on the one hand, you have these very high standards that you have to meet, but then local communities, for example, they say, well, actually, we don't want a bridge that looks like a giant slab of concrete, and the whole thing gets bogged down in planning disputes.
Yeah, this is exactly what happened at Bowood Lane, for example, which we talked about recently, where the bridge has to be built to a standard that stops cars falling off of it and landing on an HS2 train, because it turns out that a car landing on a train doing 200 miles an hour is very, very bad. And so they put massive 6-foot concrete parapets along the side of it, which they have to do to meet engineering standards. And then the local town says, couldn't we have some like nice Victorian railings or something instead? And so it sort of gets locked into this endless massive dispute. But that's not what happened here. There are absolutely no objections to the bridge being rebuilt. There is no public opposition to the plan. There's no like political opposition or movements against it. It is just being built, and it will be open in the summer of 2027.
That's astonishing, Martin. I almost think we should visit to pay tribute to this seemingly well-functioning bridge project. So break this down for me, Martin. Are you actually saying with this story that we can actually build things quickly and cheaply in Britain after all?
Exactly. It turns out that when everyone acts like grown-ups and there's no political opposition or indecision, we really can just magic a bridge away on Christmas Day and whack up a new one in a year or so. And in fact, the new bridge will take about the same time to open as the one that we built in the days of World War II did. And hopefully, James, it will last until World War III or possibly even World War IV. And all jokes aside, I think it's a good reminder, a Christmas reminder, that when we want to, we can actually get stuff done in this country and do it pretty competently and pretty well. But also, for all of the miracles of World War II, it is also possible to build things a little bit too quick. But do you know what you can't do too quickly, James?
Surprise me, Martin.
It's like and subscribe to the podcast, James. Like, smash those buttons, people, and we'll try and bring you more festive cheer in the future.
So, Martin, before we get to this week's guest, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. We've already plugged and told people to subscribe enough. Go and do that. But, Martin, we also write our Substack newsletters in addition to doing this podcast. Have you been writing about anything this week?
I'm in deep research for a piece at the moment, James, which is basically an ongoing kind of disputes between me and my local council. It's yet another one of, Martin gets annoyed by something happening locally, and it probably won't be out next week. It might be after Christmas now, because I'll be taking a bit of time off, but you can look forward to that soon. And please do subscribe to the YouTube channel that I've set up this year. There'll be a lot more stuff coming there next year, and also, of course, to my Substack, which there'll be a link to in the show notes. And what about you, James?
So this week, Martin, I had, I'll be honest, a bit of a breakdown. I had one of those weeks. The trouble is, I write, a 2,000-word essay, essentially, every week on something. And you have to sort of place a bet on a Monday of what will I be able to finish by sort of Wednesday or Thursday. And it was just one of those weeks where I was writing something, and I was about 1,500 words in, and I was thinking, is this shit? It needs a bit more time to cook, basically. But the good news is I have actually published something. Like you, I took inspiration from you, Martin, and I thought, well, what petty grievances can I mine here? So I wrote about 5 different sort of really minor tech things that really annoy me. Forget about worries about big tech and big picture issues. I'm literally moaning about the user interface of different apps that I use, but I genuinely think it will be relatable. So yeah, you can find links to that on my Substack as well. You can find links to both of our Substacks, in fact, on abundancepod.com.
And I will say that several times in the last week, James, you've mentioned to me that you think deep sea trawlers and coal miners have it pretty easy compared to you. I think, if only they could understand how difficult it is to be a multimedia content node in the modern economy, they wouldn't complain about things like working conditions nearly as much as they do. I think that's a fair summary of your views, James.
Absolutely. Nobody knows my pain, Martin. It really is. It is hard. No, but anyway, before we get even more reflective, let's get to this week's guest. And it's a fun one this week. We've been speaking to James Small-Edwards, who is a member of the London Assembly, our first Assembly member, I think, on the show. He's put out a fascinating new report this week about the different trade-offs between data centres, housing and energy usage in the capital. It's a shocking one. So here's my chat earlier this week with James. So I'm delighted to be joined now by James Small-Edwards, the London Assembly member for West Central London. And it's brilliant to have you on the show because you've just published a fascinating new report titled Gridlocked, How Planning Can Ease London's Electricity Constraints. So can you start by giving me the headline? What's the really striking takeaway from this? It's about data centres. It turns out they're a bit of a problem.
Yeah, so I'd say the headline from the report is that in 2022, a lot of housing in West London had to be delayed because of a proliferation of data centres. It focused on the boroughs of Hillingdon, Hounslow and Ealing. And basically, the developers were writing to the GLA saying we're not being offered grid connections until 2037. So like a full 15 years into the future, 5,300 homes were delayed in the pipeline by November of that year. And then, the GLA had to basically come forward and think about how they could unlock those homes. But due to a data center proliferation that no one had planned for.
So this sounds crazy to me. Like, when I was reading the report, so 2037, just sort of put this into context for me. Presumably, is that a case of these homes are going to be finished by 2037 and there's just going to be nothing to sort of plug them into? Or is it a case of they're already being constructed now and then they're just going to have to wait around empty for that long? What does this physically look like?
Yeah, so the homes were built out, the homes were ready to go, and they were then coming forward trying to get their grid connection, but we're being told, actually, there's no spare capacity in the grid. We're going to have to wait until 2037. So the homes you've just built, unfortunately, not going to be able to fill them for another 15 years.
That's breaking my brain. Where was this? And how many homes was this again, sorry?
So it was 19 developments by November 2022, 5,300 homes at that stage.
That's horrifying. Like, I knew this in the abstract, but just thinking about it, it's just like they just sat there doing nothing, I guess. So is there any more you can say about the sort of scale of the problem? Is this a new thing? Is this entirely data centers, or is this just sort of energy in general?
So there was an investigation done into it because the GLA received the reports from the developers themselves. And basically there was one cause, and that was data center proliferation in those boroughs and then along the M4 corridor, because the electricity network that those West London boroughs sit on is the same as Slough, where there's also a lot of data centres. I think just to give your listeners a taste of how power hungry these data centres are, a typical AI data centre is the equivalent of 100,000 homes in terms of electricity requirement. Now, there are some data centres, like the training data centres, you see large ones in the US, which are way, way more than that, up to millions of homes. But your typical one in the UK tends to be about 100,000 homes in terms of power. So you can see why, if quite a few of those came forward, they could have the effect of really putting a lot of pressure on your grid and your capacity.
And is this basically a post-AI thing? My understanding is that, AI data centers, particularly because they use GPUs, which are much more power consumptive than traditional data centers. Is this something we've only seen emerge as a problem in the last sort of few years, like post-ChatGPT, post all of this money going into AI? Or is this a sort of a longer run problem than that?
So the problem actually emerged prior to the release of ChatGPT. So I'd say it's an issue that probably predates the big AI boom we've seen in recent years. But what I would say is everything you've also said just now is obviously correct. And it only means that the problem, I think, could potentially get worse in the future, which is why, as a committee, we were really keen to look into it.
And I think there's a map in the report, isn't there, of all the data centres around. There's actually loads of data centres around London at the moment. So I guess there must be a big pipeline of stuff they want to build, because London is somewhere you want to put a data centre. I don't want a buffering wheel when I'm watching YouTube or Netflix. So I want data centres as well. So presumably we need to build some of those as well.
Yeah, so currently we have about 500 data centres in the UK. There's 100 planned in the planning system, and over half of those are for London and the home county. So, as you say, there's a big focus on London and the surrounding area. And the reason for that is the inference data centres, which tend to be the type that we build in the UK. They want to be as close to where you're requesting ChatGPT information, where you're trying to load that YouTube video. They want to be as close to that as possible. And a lot of the demand, there's a lot of office jobs in London. A lot of the demand for these LLM AI services are in London. So that's why you see quite a lot of the pipeline based in London and the South East, really.
So the report details, again, the sort of the scale of this issue and how it's holding up the building of homes. And obviously we talked on our show endlessly about how we want to build homes. So have you sort of landed on any solution? The report's got a number of recommendations in it about how this problem could be mitigated. So can you talk me through that? Is this something that London can deal with on its own, or does it need the government in Westminster to do something?
So yeah, we made a number of recommendations. I would say our three key recommendations were to have a separate use class for data centres. So that's something that's focused on the government. Doesn't require primary legislation, you can do it through secondary legislation. But currently, data centres are classed as B8 use class, which is the same as a normal warehouse, which I think anyone who's listened to the last few minutes of this podcast will realise that a building that's taking up 100,000 homes in power is not a normal warehouse. So I think that really needs updating in the planning system. That's something that sits with government. Then there are two recommendations which are more focused at the Mayor and the GLA, which is to include a data centre policy in the next London plan, so that we're more strategically looking at where in the city can we accommodate these new data centres, so you don't have the proliferation you had in West London and the effects on housing that it had in those boroughs, and then also energy demand assessments from those large users. So currently, I could get planning application for a data centre, but then submit my energy requirements to the local authority once planning permission has already been given. I think that's the wrong way around, and that basically that work should be done beforehand, because it often takes 5 to 10 years for those grid reinforcements to come in. But I think as well, what's really important is that this isn't an issue that's just facing us. There's many other cities and countries facing the same problem. But in other places, it's arguably even worse. So in Dublin, since 2022, they've effectively had a moratorium on new data centres. They said their grid can't anticipate any more until 2028. I think 21% of their electricity system is currently data centres. So 1/5 of the whole country's electricity output is on data centres. And then Amsterdam has also had 2 moratoriums on data centres, I think one in 2018 and one in 2023. So we don't want to get to a situation where we're saying no to this, brilliant investment in new technology, which could create lots of jobs, because we can't handle it. My view is very much, and I tried to articulate this in the report, that we want new housing and new data centre and AI infrastructure coming in.
It seems very frustrating that, both of these things are quite good things to have. More data centres is good for economic growth. More homes is good for places for people to live. But we're in this annoying position where there's sort of a trade-off between the two because of this energy requirement.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth adding that since the publication report, I think it was on Monday, the 8th of December, the National Energy System Operator, NESO, someone we spoke to as part of the investigation, I'd probably say the key player in a lot of this energy planning work. They've basically made some changes to the way the grid connections work. So previously, it was done on a first come, first served basis. So I put in an application. I might not need that power for another 10 years, but that power is allocated to me. And basically what that's led to is a lot of spare capacity in the system taken up by applications, for housing or for energy that hasn't been built out yet. So they're trying to change that so that shovel-ready projects are prioritised. And the government have actually made a number of changes to data centres as well, classifying them as critical national infrastructure, which hopefully should improve the issue.
I don't know how much of a crazy suggestion this is, but is this a problem that London could sort of build its own energy generation capabilities outside of the national government saying, we want a new power plant here? I think a century ago, wasn't the Tube powered by its own power stations or something which were completely separate to the rest of the grid? So could we not do something like that and have like London-specific power stations generating power for London homes?
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea, and it's an idea that a lot of the tech founders themselves have already hastened on. I know Sam Altman, who runs OpenAI, also owns a nuclear fission company. So, and I think Satya Nadella, who's CEO of Microsoft, has said that the biggest fear he thinks with the AI future is access to power. So it's definitely something that the founders of the companies themselves are doing. Maybe that's something the state should think about doing as well.
And one of the other recommendations in the report as well, and this is fascinating, you talk about like microgeneration or like making homes more efficient and basically retrofitting social housing and other sort of low-income housing and stuff to try and make it more energy efficient. Do you think that's a sort of a scalable solution to the problem? Because it reminds me of a little bit of how often, people talk about why do we need solar farms when why can't we just put solar panels on existing buildings? And the answer is because it's much cheaper to put solar panels in a field than onto existing buildings. So how sort of scalable is that as a workaround? Because presumably going through and existing homes and trying to make them more efficient and trying to retrofit, I don't know, solar panels onto the roofs of blocks of housing, that's surely quite a difficult problem rather than just create more energy at source, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I think that recommendation alone obviously isn't going to deal with the issue, but I think it would help. Most of our suggestions were focused more on supply and on planning, but I think there's also things you can do on the demand side as well. Now, there's a whole other group of people who think it's all, demand and we should be pursuing a degrowth agenda. That's not what we're trying to say at all in the report. But I think insulating homes is part of a wider solution that would help. If households are requiring less electricity themselves because they're more energy efficient, they're more insulated, then I think that would have a benefit. Maybe not a huge benefit, but definitely a benefit on the capacity issues that we've seen.
So finally, you really identified this as an issue. It needs to be dealt with. Is there anything that, you could pick up the phone now and Ed Miliband could do today to sort of get things rolling on this? Or is this sort of a broader, longer term problem that needs people to write strategies and this sort of thing? Is there any sort of quick wins on this?
So what I would say is that a lot of good work has been done. So the issues that I mentioned at the top of the programme in terms of in Hillingdon, in Hounslow and Ealing, that those problems were solved. It was really good work done by the Infrastructure Coordination Service at the GLA, navigating with the boroughs and with the various electricity providers and National Grid to sort the issue. So I think the headline problem was actually solved. So there was definitely good work done. I think the changes that I mentioned around NESO and the changes from the first come, first served issue are going to have a big impact and free up a lot of spare capacity that already actually exists in the system, which is something that potentially I wasn't aware of before I started delving into this more deeply. But in terms of national policy, I think we should continue pursuing a policy which is decarbonising, which is focusing on clean generation. I think we've just got to make sure that we're anticipating how much demand there is going to be from data centres in the future. So currently, NESO, their projection is a 200 to 600% increase in electricity demand from data centres to 2050. That's a pretty wide variance between 200 and 600%. But I think in many ways, it's very hard to model. I mean, no one knows how much the AI boom is going to take off in Britain. We hope as much as possible. But I think national government need to prepare for the best case scenario, which is, I think, there's more and more demand from data centres from AI, and ensure that we've got the power generation needed to meet that demand.
And can you paint me a picture of the sort of the worst case scenario? So now you've identified the problem, you've put this report out there, and you're drawing attention to it. You've been all across the media for the past couple of weeks talking about it. If nobody pays attention, what's London going to look like, and what problems are we going to have down the road by 2037? Are we going to have risk brownouts? Is it going to be just housing is absurdly expensive because we can't build even less than we're building now? What's the bleak future we're trying to avoid?
Well, I think it leads to some really tough choices, which other cities have already had to make. So Amsterdam and Dublin, as I've said, have basically said no to all new data centres. And that's going to have big impacts in their ability to win the race for new jobs in artificial intelligence. We've got a really thriving, I think, artificial intelligence sector in the UK. We've got some universities pumping out great research, and we want to take advantage of that. We don't want to be in a situation where we're saying no to talent, no to investment, no to economic growth, because we don't have the power to deliver it. It also means that another, I'd say probably the biggest problem we have in London is the housing crisis. We don't want to get a situation where we're having to make a decision between, okay, can we have new housing in London or do we have economic growth in London? We need to have both. And I think the new housing depends upon the economic growth, and the economic growth depends upon the new housing. We don't want to be having to make horrible decisions around prioritising the economy or prioritising housing.
I couldn't agree with you more. Very finally, before I let you go, James, we're a very serious journalistic outlet at The Abundance Agenda. We need to hold our politicians to account. So I have got one final question, which is, your report is titled Gridlocked, How Planning Can Ease London's Electricity Constraints. That's only one pun. Last week on the show, we featured actually another report from another London Assembly member. I think this was led by Neil Garrett, and it was called Euston, We Have a Problem, Mind the Funding Gap. He managed to fit 2 puns into the title of his report. Can I get a pledge from you now, on the record, to do better next time and match him pun for pun?
James, I'm very happy to give that pledge. I'm very happy to give that pledge. I will go away, I will look at myself long and hard in the mirror and endeavour to be much funnier the next time I come on this podcast.
Fantastic. James Small-Edwards, thank you very much. And that's just about it for this week's show. Martin, how do you think it's gone?
I think great. I'm really looking forward to the next few weeks over Christmas and just having a little bit of downtime and coming back in the new year to do the terrifying thing, which is finish writing a book by the summer. So listeners can expect more details on that probably in the next couple of months.
I'm sort of fascinated to see how it's going to go, Martin. I think it could go either way. I think you could just sail through like a competent professional, churning out the words you need, or it could lead to a breakdown. I can't work out which way it's going to go, which bet I'm going to place.
Yeah, I mean, it's either way, it's going to be exciting, right? And there's going to be lots of good content for people to consume.
And sooner than that, if you want more content, do listen to this show next week. It will hopefully be a special one. We're recording it on Thursday. It's a bit different to our usual format. I won't say more yet, but it'll be a bit more Christmassy than usual, hopefully.
Yes, it's a festive special with some very special guests as well. So very much looking forward to that.
And if it ends up being a best of special, something fell apart with the scheduling. But yeah, but for now, go back and listen to the back catalogue, abundancepod.com. Subscribe to our Substacks. Links again on abundancepod.com. But for now, thanks for listening.
See you next week.
Bye.